Hi everyone, welcome to Indie Book Review. This is Jacob. Let's review some indie books. Independent authors are heroes. They're making great art, especially the kind of sci-fi that I grew up with that got me interested into science and technology and entertained me in those long, boring years of my youth. They're supporting us by making great art, so let's support them with our time, attention, and money. The first author I want to review is Isaac Young. I found this guy on X. He just seemed to be making the kind of art that I'm interested in. High concept, sci-fi, fantasy, and stuff in between. He is an author, a Catholic, 25 years old. I catch myself saying he's a promising young writer because of his age, but he's actually a good writer. This is not someone making his first experimental forays into novels. The quality of his prose is up there with published authors, I would say, in middle of the sci-fi genre, people like Orson Scott Card, or any of the classic age of sci-fi authors from the 80s and 90s. He's also inspired by people like Gene Wolfe, and he's aiming for something a little bit more, something transcendental. And this is going to sound like an insult, and I don't mean it that way, but he's a better writer than Brandon Sanderson. Now, I don't like Brandon Sanderson that much, but he sold more books than anyone else in the genre fiction universe that's not named J.K. Rowling. So if you're a better writer than Brandon Sanderson, if you're passing that bar, then quality is not what's holding you back. Let's highlight a couple of his works. First of all, there is a Kickstarter going right now for his next book, his upcoming book, The Last Human, where you can get a physical copy, signed and autographed. Go ahead, pledge the top tier if you can afford it, and send him a note. Encourage him to make this book. 3 days left to go, so go ahead and sign up. The first book I read was The Domes of Calrathia. This came out in February of 2025, and this book is in the Dying Earth genre. It's sort of a far future science fiction book where civilization is receding and technology is so advanced that it looks like magic. Now, if you're a fan of Gene Wolfe, especially the Book of the New Sun, a lot of the plot points and tropes are going to look familiar to you. That's because Gene Wolfe in the Book of the New Sun kind of invented the genre of Dying Earth. We have a young protagonist in exile from his guild sent off on an epic quest across a dying wasteland where there's pockets of civilization still existing. This was a very entertaining book. It gripped me from the beginning. Starts off with a couple of action scenes that were very easy to follow, well written, thrilling, and then it proceeds through a number of plot points as the protagonist continues on his quest. Now, for me, this was an enjoyable book, but I would rate it as a good rather than a great novel. And I have a few criticisms for it, a few friendly criticisms for it. But my first criticism is that it is only 242 pages. And for epic fantasy, you really want that sense of scale and scope. You tend to need either longer cycles of books or larger books to let the world breathe a bit, to let the sense of wonder come over the reader. My second criticism is that it is a little tropey in following the genre. If you just are fresh off of reading Book of the New Sun, a lot of the plot points and characters are going to seem pretty similar. And my third criticism is that the protagonist is a little bit too goody two-shoes. He's very honorable, very straightforward. He seems to always do what is right. And compared to a character like Severian, which is easy to draw that comparison, he's just not as interesting. Now, the book's strengths are the characters around the protagonist. The best part of the book is about 30 to 40% where the protagonist gets waylaid in the city of Terminus. He saves the lives of two young women who then invite him to stay with them, and he gets drawn into the power politics of Terminus nobility. It's a big chunk of the book. It's very original and it's very good. It feels exciting. And there's a particular point where the protagonist is traveling in the rivers underneath the city with one of the ladies that the book reaches its spiritual, emotional climax. And this is one of those points where Isaac, as a fan of Catholic authors like Gene Wolfe is reaching for that transcendental register, and I think he hits it. And that's not something that every author can do. So I feel like this book has an extraordinary moment, and that puts it head and shoulders above most books of the genre. So I hope Isaac extends this a little bit longer, needs another volume or 3. Moving on to the second book I read. The second book I read is Dead Men Running. This is a comic book superhero novel taking place in a future dystopian America. It's post-nuclear exchange, and the democratic powers, the Democratic Union, has formed and ratcheted up the control to make a totalitarian Western world. I like that setting. I think enough people can visualize how our system of government, because it is ours, could become evil. And also, this is a book that takes the politics of superheroes seriously. These are deadly weapons and threats to the regime. They have to be controlled and incorporated into the structure of power. And that's what happens in this world. Now, this one was published a year later in March 2026. And I feel like between the two, it's the better book. So that's cool to see that the later book being the better one means that he's getting better with time. So, you know, Isaac's a young writer. Who knows how great of heights he can reach. Now, this book is also pretty short. It's 235 pages. But I feel like that goes better with a superhero book than it does with epic fantasy. This is the length of, say, 8 to 10 comic books worth of plot, which would be about one big story arc in a comic book universe. I also think that if Isaac decides to revisit these, this one's going to be a lot easier to extend than the epic fantasy series. Epic fantasy plot arcs need to be carefully planned out and advanced and reach a satisfying conclusion, whereas comic book stories can pick up any dangling thread and always just add on an extra volume. There's not anywhere where they really need to get, like Superman, Batman, the X-Men. These things have been published for near 100 years by now. Now, I don't normally read comic book novels, and so I don't know that this is exactly the book for me, but I just feel like it's extremely well executed for what it is. If this is your genre, then this book seems like a perfect embodiment of that genre. I don't think superhero stories get much better than this. So I'm not going to rank this as one of my favorite books of all time, but I do think it is an excellent piece of work. Now, I'll wrap up with one more observation, and maybe this is a little too ad hominem, so I apologize in advance. But being at the stage of his career and life that he is as a 25-year-old author, it just seems to me that perspective is better for writing superhero stories than epic fantasy. At 25, you're coming into your creative prime, but you can still relate to the younger crowd that normally reads superhero stories. So I looked up how old the creators of some famous superhero IPs were when they released their IP. Superman, Batman, this new show called Invincible that comes from a comic book. It's a little woke, but kind of fun, but it's a big hit. And the creators of all those IPs were all between 23 and 25 when they wrote them. And then I looked up the creators of epic fantasies like Gene Wolfe, J.R.R. Tolkien, and George R.R. Martin. And all those guys, when they released the first tome in their epic series, were 48 years old. Tolkien was 45 when he released The Hobbit. I think he was 48 when he released The Fellowship of the Ring. And I'm not saying a 25-year-old can't make epic fantasy, but I do feel like that might be why the protagonist in the Domes of Calrathia, Sirius, comes across as a little flat and uninteresting. Like maybe to write someone like Severian, you need to have a little seasoning on you. You need to have had back pain or watched family members die. Like, does Dostoevsky get to be Dostoevsky before he gets arrested for anti-government activities, is spared a firing squad at the last minute, and then takes his new life and loses it with a crippling gambling addiction before finally hitting rock bottom and turning his life around? Whereas the characters in Dead Men Running, the jaded young superhero, the grizzled older one, the checked out hobo, they all come across as great characters to me. So both these books are worth your time, and I hear great things about The Last Human. Isaac's Twitter following ranks that as their #1 book, so I'm sure I'm going to enjoy that as well. So So if you have any other indie authors you want me to review, leave a comment. I'll get around to them. Let me know. And in the meantime, follow indie authors, give them your money, support them. Until next time, peace.